Welcome back, everyone, to episode 2 of the iProgress podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dean.
And I'm your second host, Craig.
So today we're going to be talking about mental health in academia, and it's kind of irrelevant of whether you're a student, a PhD student, a early career researcher, or a full-fledged professor. Mental health is pervasive across everybody. Obviously, we do our best to keep our heads above the water, but should we actually be having to do that? You know, this is perhaps one of the only professions in the world where it seems to be normalized perhaps on social medias, and that's something we're going to be talking about later on in the episodes in terms of all of this pressure that academics are faced with. So Craig, moving into our kind of first subtopic of the day, talking about the kind of scope of mental health in academia, what I thought I might do is just read out to you 3 findings over the last 5 years and getting your takes on them, and maybe let's have a discussion around them. Okay, sure. So first of all, this is from a study by Evans et al. In 2018. 2,000 odd participants across 26 countries. Okay, so we're talking kind of worldwide here. Reported that grad students are more than 6 times as likely to experience depression and anxiety compared to the general population. We have a study by Levecque et al. 2017, so 5 years ago. A near 4,000 sample of PhD students from Belgium. They indicated a prevalence of what the research paper called psychiatric disorders being higher amongst academics than generally highly educated populations. And also a report from 2019 that was reported in Nature shows that over 6,000 participants, 36% said that they had sought help for anxiety and depression, which they profess was caused by their PhD studies. What's your kind of initial thoughts on those findings?
Well, I mean, initially, obviously, they're really troubling. What was the first stat? 6 times more likely to experience depression? Was that?
Yes. So more than 6 times as likely to experience depression and anxiety compared to the general population.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably consistent with what I would, maybe slightly higher than what I would expect, I guess, among PhD students. I know when I was doing my PhD, I struggled a little bit with anxiety, depression. Maybe not depression as much, but anxiety definitely. And I think that's quite a common experience, actually, in terms of people maybe thinking through what their role is in this kind of higher education ecosystem, thinking about where they fit in. I'm sure one thing that we'll mention a few times in this episode is imposter syndrome.
Sure.
Thinking about where people, whether they fit in academia at all. But yeah, obviously huge numbers of people experiencing things like anxiety and depression. The interesting one for me, though, was around the final stat. So people reporting depressive symptoms or anxiety related directly to their PhD studies. Do you have any more information about that? Is that something that you've looked into?
No, so I haven't looked into it in kind of too much detail. I just kind of grabbed these off for the episode, but it was a global survey which was for doctoral students specifically. So I think that might be something useful for us to look into for the crib notes for this episode, which will obviously attach to every episode going forward. For me, though, there's 2 key points here. There's the sheer amount of numbers in terms of these samples. So we're not just talking about sub 100 or 100 to 1,000 participants. We're talking in excess of 2.5K for each of these studies. Secondly, it's not just being located to one country. Okay, so these are international findings across the globe, and it's showing that whatever this underpinning is, whether it's a direct cause of the PhD or whether it's academia more pervasively, there's something here that's troublesome. There's something here that perhaps needs to be done, at least looked at. What is the exact mechanism which is relating undergoing higher education, undergoing PhD study, walking into academia, which is, if not causing, severely contributing to poor mental health?
I guess if we start thinking about PhD students, PhD candidates, and what their experience is like, a lot of the time there's a clock on their project, so they have a deadline that they have to work to. They have a maximum registration period, at least in the UK that's the case. So there's that kind of impending kind of deadline, I guess, all the time of having to maybe look over your shoulder and thinking through, am I making enough progress? We know that there are high levels of kind of social comparison that people kind of engage with, looking at their friends, looking at people on their cohort, thinking about whether or not they are keeping up with their colleagues. So maybe there's something in that. Obviously, there's things around workload and burnout, particularly among early career researchers. I know that I still do struggle quite a bit with that sometimes, thinking through how do I manage this kind of the sheer volume of work that is kind of in academia. So there's various different ways that we can think about this, I suppose.
100%. And I kind of guess something that perhaps you didn't touch on there, that just to give the whole picture, is with PhD students specifically, oftentimes one of the key metrics to being awarded a PhD is this unique contribution of knowledge. Okay. And we're in a very fast-paced world at the minute where people are being taught to jump on key social issues and develop impactful research about that. And I know a PhD student that I've coached in the past. She came to the first year of her PhD. She's invested so much time into that work, only to find a paper that was just coming out in publication that, from the title, was extremely similar to her PhD topic. And I think that that's actually something which is, you know, I don't know if it's faced by every single PhD student, but it was certainly faced by her. Luckily, I think in that case, the paper wasn't as, let's say the paper wasn't as solid, you know, as it should have been. And so their PhD work was able to overcome those limitations that actually made their work stronger. But I would say that's a cause for concern for any PhD student, you know, that your work might be getting scoped or stolen from under you.
100%. I had exactly that experience when I started my PhD. The first week, I had an idea of the first study that I wanted to run. Started doing my lit review for that study, and one of the first hits was exactly what I was going to be doing, looking at the same manipulation, the same outcomes.
Wow.
It was identical. So yeah, I completely kind of appreciate how difficult that is, and thinking about then what do you do? How do you regroup? I think people who are post PhD also experience this. I know when I started doing more independent work, it was about kind of how do I kind of map out a route for myself that isn't my supervisors or isn't my advisors' area of research. How do I make a name for me rather than being my supervisor's supervisee, if that makes sense? I don't know if you've had similar experiences. I know that people that we work with have had similar kind of concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really important for me coming to the kind of end of my PhD that I was able to walk out of my current institution. I know lots of people find that they feel at home in the institution they've done their PhDs in. You know, it's oftentimes it might be, and I'm going to use quotes for people who aren't watching this on YouTube. It might be a little bit easier to stay in the kind of current institution and kind of get employment there. But for me, it was really important that I was able to step away from that institution and not become Professor X's student, even when I'm actually in that, even when I'm actually in that job. Although I would love to become Professor X's student. So I think that, yes, it's really important to be carving a name out for yourself. I think if you don't, you stand to kind of lose a lot of ground in the academic community. And because we're talking, you know, about mental health, that's something which I think could potentially be one of the core underpinnings of PhD students walking into that early career academic role. And I know in a couple of minutes time we're going to be moving on to talking about some of the potential causes of this poor mental health, but I think it's a really good place to just kind of acknowledge that the statistics, these aren't cherry-picked studies that I thought I'd introduce us to in the slightest. These are studies which, you know, are just the top 3 of a large cohort of potential studies I could have presented for us to discuss. Large numbers, international application. It suggests that something needs to be done.
Oh, 100%. And I think for people that are listening, if they are in this kind of situation, thinking about the fact that you're not by yourself, I think it's quite easy for people when they are struggling with mental health issues in academia to feel quite isolated, particularly when we're in this environment where it's quite kind of normalized to think about outputs and productivity and sheer numbers of publications or papers or students that you're teaching. You hear a lot of success stories in academia, and it's quite difficult sometimes to get some of those more negative experiences heard. So things like rejections that you get from journal articles, rejections from job applications, and kind of where that leaves you and how that leaves you feeling can be quite isolating, I think. So we're acknowledging actually that there's a sizable proportion of academia that is feeling similar or similarly to how you are is I don't want to say reassuring, because we shouldn't be in this situation, but certainly should feel hopefully less isolating. I think we've kind of reached a critical mass at one point of if we have this kind of sheer number, the sheer volume of people experiencing mental health issues related to their work in academia, it becomes incumbent on universities, on regulators, on editors, on all of these various stakeholders in academia to actually do something about it, then to think about what workloads look like, to think about training, to think about how we can develop a context of higher education that is more realistic to what people can do, the capacities that people have in terms of their time and their mental resource, but also their mental well-being, and how do we maximize that. And I think that's what we're trying to do as well with iProgress.
100%. And I was just thinking, as you were saying, that yes, that is on one hand, that is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to normalize this discussion without scaring people away from the profession. But as you were saying, that what a huge hill we have to climb. You know, not only do we have to establish this, we have to get people talking about it, and then we actually have to reach out to these people that can be making a difference and persuade them that they need to make a difference.